Welcome back to Armageddon 2419 AD, Chapter 4, A Han Air Raid. There was a girl in Wilma's camp named Gerdi with whom Bill Hearn was desperately in love, and the four of us used to go around a lot together. Gertie was a distinct type, whereas Wilma had the usual dark brown hair and hazel eyes that marked nearly every member of the community. Gertie had red hair, blue eyes, and very fair skin. She had been dead many years now, but I remember her vividly because she was a throwback in physical appearance to a certain 20th century type which I have found very rare among modern Americans. Also, because the four of us were engaged one day in a discussion of this very point when I obtained my first experience of a air raid. We were sitting high on the side of a hill, overlooking the valley that teemed with human activity, invisible beneath its blanket of foliage. The other three, who knew of the Irish but vaguely and indefinitely as a race on the other side of the globe, which, like ourselves, had succeeded in maintaining a precarious and fugitive existence in rebellion against the Mongolian domination of the earth, were listening with interest to my theory that Gerdy's ancestors of several hundred years ago must have been Irish. I explained that Gertie was an Irish type, evidently a throwback, and that her surname might well have been McMahon or McMahon, and still more anciently Mathgahiman. They were interested, too, in my surmise that Gertie was the same name as that which had been Gertie or Gertrude in the 20th century. In the middle of our discussion, we were startled by an alarm rocket that burst high in the air far to the north, spreading a pall of red smoke that drifted like a cloud. It was followed by others at scattered points in the northern sky. "A Han raid!" Bill exclaimed in amazement. "They're the first in 7 years!" "Maybe it's just one of their ships off its course," I ventured. "No," said Wilma in some agitation. "That would be green rockets. Red means only one thing, Tony. They're sweeping the countryside with their dis-beams. Can you see anything, Bill?" "We had better get under cover," Gertie said nervously. "The four of us are bunched up here in the open. For all we know, they may be 12 miles up, out of sight, yet looking at us with a projecto." Bill had been sweeping the horizon hastily with his glass, but apparently saw nothing. "We had better scatter at that," he said finally. "It's orders, you know. See?" He pointed to the valley. Here and there a tiny human figure shot for a moment above the foliage of the treetops. "That's bad," Wilma commented as she counted the jumpers. "No less than 15 people visible, and all clearly radiating from a central point. Do they want to give away our location?" The standard orders covering air raids were that the population was to scatter individually. There should be no grouping or even pairing in view of the destructiveness of the disintegrator rays. Experience of generations had proved that if this were done and everybody remained hidden beneath the tree screens, the Hans would have to sweep mile after mile of territory, foot by foot, to catch more than a small percentage of the community. Gertie, however, refused to leave Bill, and Wilma developed an equal obstinacy against quitting my side. "I was inexperienced at this sort of thing," she explained, quite ignoring the fact that she was two. She was only 13 or 14 years old at the time of the last air raid. Since I could not argue her out of it, we leaped together about a quarter of a mile to the right, while Bill and Gertie disappeared down the hillside among the trees. Wilma and I both wanted a point of vantage from which we might overlook the valley and the sky to the north, and we found it near the top of the ridge where, protected from visibility by thick branches, we could look out between the tree trunks and get a good view of the valley. No more rockets went up, except for a few of those warning red clouds drifting lazily in a blue sky. There was no visible indication of a man's past or present existence anywhere in the sky or on the ground. Then Wilma gripped my arm and pointed. I saw it. Away, off in the distance, looking like a phantom dirigible airship in its coat of low visibility paint, a bare specter. 7,000 feet up, Wilma whispered, crouching close to me. Watch. The ship was about the same shape as the great dirigibles of the 20th century that I had seen, but without the suspended control car, engines, propellers, rudders, or elevating planes. As it loomed rapidly nearer, I saw that it was wider and somewhat flatter than I had supposed. Now I could see the repeller rays that held the ship aloft, like searchlight beams, faintly visible in the bright daylight, and still faintly visible to the human eye at night. Actually, I had been informed by my instructors there were two rays, the one the visible one generated by the ship's apparatus and directed toward the ground as a beam of carrier impulses, and the true repeller ray, the complement of the other in one sense, induced by the action of the carrier and reacting in a concentrating upward direction from the mass of the earth, becoming successively electronic, atomic, and finally molecular in its nature, according to various ratios of distance between the Earth mass and carrier source, until, in the last analysis, the ship itself actually is supported on an upward rushing column of air, much like a ball continuously supported on a fountain jet. The raider neared with incredible speed. Its rays were both slanted astern at a sharp angle so that it slid forward with tremendous momentum. The ship was operating two disintegrator rays, though only in a casual, intermittent fashion, but whenever they flashed downward with blinding brilliancy, forest, rocks, and ground melted instantaneously into nothing where they played upon them. When I later inspected the scars left by these rays, I found them some 5 feet deep and 30 feet wide, the exposed surfaces being lava like in texture, but a pale, iridescent greenish hue. No systematic use of rays was made by the ship, however, until it reached a point over the center of the valley, the center of the community's activities. It came to a sudden stop by shooting its repeller beams sharply forward and easing them back gradually to the vertical, holding the ship floating and motionless. Then the work of destruction began systematically. Back and forth traveled the destroying rays, plowing parallel furrows from hillside to hillside. We gasped in dismay, Wilma and I, as time after time we saw it plow through sections where we knew camps or plants were located. This is awful, she moaned, a terrified question in her eyes. How could they know the location so exactly, Tony? Did you see? They were never in doubt. They stalled at a predetermined spot, and it was exactly the right spot. We did not talk of what might happen if the rays were turned in our direction. We both knew we would simply disintegrate in a split second into mere scattered electronic vibrations. Strangely enough, it was this self reliant girl of the 25th century who clung to me, a relatively primitive man of the 20th, less familiar than she with the thought of this terrifying possibility for moral support. We knew that many of our companions must have been whisked into absolute non existence before our eyes in these few moments. The whole thing paralyzed us into mental and physical immobility for I do not know how long. It couldn't have been long, however, for the rays had not plowed more than 30 or of their 20-foot furrows or so across the valley when I regained control of myself and brought Wilma to herself by shaking her roughly.